I swear on everything holy. I came home just in time to witness a scene that looked like something out of a fever dream. My grandfather, Walter Grayson, 78 years old, white hair flying in the wind, wielding a baseball bat like it was Excalibur, facing down an entire demolition crew. This wasn't just old man stubbornness, it was raw determination forged in steel, the kind that makes the ground tremble. He stood his ground, legs firm, eyes blazing like a sheriff in a western about. To draw his gun, on the other side the demolition guys wearing yellow helmets and revving noisy machines looked like they couldn't decide whether to laugh or run. And me? I could only think, this is about to get ugly. And what was all this about? It wasn't just a pile of rotten wood they wanted to tear down. That crooked old structure, full of cracks and memories, was more than just old boards. It was a living piece of American history, an echo from a time most have forgotten. My grandfather, a retired judge who spent decades deciding the fate of others, wasn't about to let it turn to dust without a fight. He said that deck held more truth than all the courtrooms he ever presided over. And let me tell you, when Walter Grayson spoke in that deep voice that made even the wind go quiet, you believed him. Pineview Heights HOA, with its pristine pools, hand-perfect lawns, thought they could bulldoze it all without blinking. Big mistake. They weren't counting on old Walt, a man who had faced slick lawyers, cunning criminals, and even a courtroom riot or two, and lived to tell the tale. This wasn't just a fight over a deck, it was war. And Pineview Heights was about to learn they'd messed with the wrong Grayson. It all started months ago. It all started months ago in Pineview Heights, a neighborhood that once felt almost idyllic, the kind of place where people waved lazily with a lukewarm cup of coffee in hand while the sun gleamed on the white rooftops. My grandfather, Walter Grayson, lived at the edge of the neighborhood in a house he built from the ground up 40 years ago, brick by brick, with his own sweat. It wasn't a mansion, but it had soul, a rare thing in a sea of identical facades. In the backyard, hidden among twisted oaks and an unruly lawn he refused to mow evenly, stood Grayson's overlook. It wasn't just a rickety wooden platform. It was a relic, lovingly restored with beams salvaged from a Civil War railway, pieces of history that still smelled of iron and soot. The state of Virginia had recognized it as a historical landmark and certified it. It was supposed to be untouchable, or so we thought. Then came the new HOA board, a troop of suit-wearing clipboard warriors led by none other than Vanessa Brooks. Vanessa looked like she was born holding a clipboard and a megaphone, tall with sharp blonde hair and eyes that measured you before you even opened your mouth. She seemed to think that being HOA president came with a crown and a scepter, treating Pineview Heights like her own little kingdom. At first it was just annoying. $50 fines for garden gnomes with crooked hats, notices for mailboxes that dared to be an inch off center. People gritted their teeth, paid up, and moved on. But Grayson's overlook? That was different. That was the dragon she decided to slay. She showed up at my grandfather's door on a Saturday morning, flashing one of those smiles that never reaches, the eyes, and holding a neatly folded slip of paper like it was a royal decree. "Mr. Grayson," she said, with a tone that made it sound like she'd already won the argument, "this structure violates the aesthetic code of the community. We're going to need you to remove it." My grandfather, who was fixing a chair on the porch with a screwdriver and a glass of iced tea beside him, raised one eyebrow. "Aesthetic code?" he replied, voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Young lady, that overlook was here before your Daddy was out of diapers. It's a registered landmark. You want it down, you'll have to go through me first." She let out a dry little laugh, like he was just some senile old man, and turned her back. Little did she know she had just poked a bear with a very short stick, and Walter Grayson wasn't one to back down. Vanessa didn't waste time. Just days after her visit, she sent an official notice, a loud yellow paper stapled to my grandfather's fence like some kind of hunting trophy. It claimed that Grayson's overlook was a threat to neighborhood aesthetics and an imminent structural risk. Aesthetic threat. This thing was made of century-old beams polished by time, with a bronze Virginia state plaque at its base. And meanwhile, Pineview Heights was full of inflatable Christmas decorations that looked like they were screaming for help. My grandfather read it, let out a raspy laugh that echoed through the yard, and went straight to his typewriter. Yes, he still uses one, an old black one with clacky keys. 5 pages later, he had a full response, a masterclass in history and law, citing state preservation acts, historical registries, and even some obscure 1892 Supreme Court ruling on private property that he must have dug up from a dusty corner. Of his mind, the grand finale. I suggest you read the Constitution before sending me another sticker, Mrs. Brooks. Respectfully, Walter Grayson. He folded the letter, sealed it with wax, and because that's how he does things, and mailed it. I thought that would settle it. Wishful thinking. Not only did Vanessa ignore the letter, she doubled down. She forged a demolition order. That's right, forged. She swiped some seal that looked like it was stolen from the Parks Department supply closet, photocopied some crooked signatures, and slapped it all on a document with as much legal weight as a bounce check. Then she hired a demolition crew, grumpy-looking guys in muddy boots with an excavator growling like a hungry monster. They showed up without warning, on a Saturday morning with Vanessa out front like a high-heeled general, pointing at the overlook like it was a wart that needed removing. My grandfather was in the yard trimming a bush with a manual clipper when he heard the machines. He dropped the clippers, grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the porch, a Louisville Slugger he won at a veterans game in 1975, and marched over. "You've got 5 seconds to get that rust bucket off my land," he said, voice solid. "Has granite, or I'll show you what happens when you mess with a Grayson." The crew exchanged looks, unsure if the old man was crazy or dangerous. Vanessa just crossed her arms with a smirk, like she thought she'd already won. She had no idea what kind of hornet's nest she'd just kicked. I arrived just in time, heart pounding, the car still screeching from the hard brake I'd hit turning. Onto the street. The scene was surreal. My grandfather, Walter Grayson, standing like a statue in the middle of the yard, baseball bat gripped tightly in his hands, facing down an excavator that growled like a beast ready to strike. The foreman, a guy named Tony, broad shoulders, the kind of face that had seen it all except this, was yelling from the top of the machine, his voice half lost in the wind. "Sir, get out of there. That's an order." He sounded confused, almost pleading, like he'd rather be knocking down an old barn than dealing with this stubborn old man. Walter didn't flinch. He just shifted the bat onto his shoulder like he was stepping up to the plate and replied, calm as a teacher, "Son, this lookout has survived floods that washed away bridges, storms that tore off roofs, and the entire Cold War without creaking a single board. A half-baked clipboard isn't going to bring it down." Tony scratched his head, looked at Vanessa like, "Now what?" But she just gave a curt wave of her hand. "Proceed." Then came the blow. The excavator lurched forward, its metal arm slammed into one of the main beams. A sharp crack, almost a cry from the old wood, and the Grayson lookout collapsed. It happened in slow motion, like a movie scene you don't want to believe. Century-old beams gave way. The crooked roof came crashing down with a groan, and a cloud of dust rose up, carrying the scent of history being ground to dust. I stood frozen, breathless, watching a piece of the past become rubble. Vanessa stepped forward, triumphant, her high heels sinking into the wet earth. But Walter, he didn't run, didn't scream, didn't lose his composure. He just took 2 steps back, calmly leaving the danger zone like a man who's seen the world fall apart before, and turned to me. His eyes were shining, not with defeat but with a cold, controlled fury. "Jake," he said, voice low but sharp as a blade being honed, "they just poked the wrong bear." And there, with the bat still in hand and the dust settling behind, him I knew. The lookout might have fallen, but the war, that was just beginning. My grandfather, Walter Grayson, isn't just a stubborn old man with a baseball bat and a short fuse. He was a federal judge for 30 years, the kind who made lawyers sweat and rulings turn into courthouse legend. He knew the law like he knew his own backyard, every article, every precedent, every loophole. The Grayson lookout wasn't just a pile of wood to him, it was shielded by state and federal law, protections he himself had reinforced years ago, when he got it officially listed as a historic landmark. So while Vanessa Brooks clapped for the pile of rubble, thinking she'd won the war with a dirty strike, Walter was already 2 steps ahead, setting up a case like someone plotting a checkmate on a chessboard. He didn't waste time. With the dust from the collapse still hanging in the air, he grabbed the phone, an old rotary model because he doesn't trust cell phones, and called the county office. "I want the record of every demolition order issued in the last 6 months, he said, voice firm like he was back on the bench. Within half an hour, the confirmation came. That so-called order Vanessa had waved around like a trophy. Fake. The seal was a poor copy, the signatures didn't match, and the protocol number belonged to a tree pruning request from across town. It was a house of cards, blown over by a whisper. But Walter didn't stop there. He picked up the phone, again, and called my Aunt Emily, a prosecutor in Washington, a woman who inherited his gift for turning paperwork into weapons. "Em," he said with a tone that mixed calm and threat, "time to play hardball. These clowns think they can trample history and walk away smiling." And then came the bombshell. As Emily began pulling strings in D.C., we discovered something Vanessa had never imagined. The Grayson lookout was one signature away from being included in a National Historic Tourism program, a project that would have brought plaques, visitors, and even federal funding to Pineview Heights. It wasn't just an old platform in my grandfather's backyard. It was a living piece of American history, an echo of the railroad that carried supplies during the Civil War, a relic telling a story far greater than the pristine lawns of the neighborhood. Vanessa hadn't just destroyed private property with a fake document. She'd erased a landmark that belonged to all of us, and Walter, with his notebook, his fountain pen, and a slow-burning fury, was ready to make her pay for every splinter, turned to dust. The neighborhood, which had lived in a kind of anesthetized silence of barbecues and garden sprinklers, started turning against Vanessa like a wave no one saw coming. It all exploded on the Pineview Heights Facebook group, that cozy virtual corner where people usually shared cookie recipes and complained about loose cats. Vanessa, thinking she had everything under control, posted a photo of the lookout's wreckage, shattered beams, settled dust, the excavator still in the background, with the caption, "Progress." She probably expected applause, maybe a chorus of "finally someone took action," but it backfired. The comments came pouring in. Mrs. Harper, a 70-year-old widow who baked cookies for everyone at Christmas, was the first to shoot. "My grandfather proposed to my grandmother at that lookout in 1952. You destroyed more than wood, Vanessa. You're a disgrace." Another neighbor, Mr. Callahan, who hardly ever left his garage, wrote, "Progress means erasing the past? Who gave you that power?" Even the teen from 12B who only posted selfies jumped in. "This is like burning down a museum. Gross." Vanessa, with an ego too big for the screen, tried to put out the fire with gasoline. She replied to Mrs. Harper with a cold, "Safety first, it was a hazard. No one bought it." The comments kept piling up. "A hazard to who? Where's the proof? You lied about the order." And the group turned into a public tribunal, where Vanessa was the defendant and she was losing. Meanwhile, Walter didn't just sit back watching with his arms crossed. He pulled the kind of strings only a former federal judge knows how to pull, and secured a federal injunction in record time. A judge in Richmond signed an order freezing all work on the site until further notice. He showed up at Vanessa's door with the document in hand, still warm from the courthouse printer, and handed it over with a polite nod. "This says stop everything, Mrs. Brooks," he said, voice firm as a hammer hitting a nail. She grabbed the paper, skimmed it with that look of someone who thinks the world revolves around her, and tore it up in his face, white shreds falling. On the lawn like confetti from a party nobody wanted. "This is just paper," she spat, her face red, her heels stomping the ground like she wanted to crack it open. Walter didn't flinch. He simply stepped back, adjusted the fedora he reserved for special occasions, the one he said he bought the day he passed the bar, and smiled. It wasn't a joyful smile, but the kind you give when you know the other person just dug their own grave. "We'll see in court, Mrs. Brooks," he said, slow and steady, like someone who already knows how the story ends, and knows it won't. Be pretty for her. And there, with the neighbors up in arms and the law on his side, Walter Grayson was ready to turn that just paper into a nightmare Vanessa would never forget. Tony, the foreman, had dirt on his hands and his hat crooked on his head when the bomb dropped. He could still feel the weight of the wad of cash Vanessa had stuffed into his shirt pocket 2 days earlier, crumpled bills smelling of old coffee, and broken promises. "It's all set, Tony," she had said, with that look of someone who already knows the ship is going down, but wants someone else to row with her. "Just tear it down and be done with it." She handed him a paper, an obviously fake order scrawled in her handwriting. Tear it down before the old man complains. At the time, he hadn't thought twice. The sun beating on his neck and the machines roaring were enough to convince him it was just another day on the job. But then the ground shook in a different way. A black pickup came roaring down the dirt road, tires screeching as it stopped, kicking up a cloud of dust that made Tony cough and curse under his breath. Out stepped Clara Evans, the state historian, her brown hair escaping a messy ponytail and a leather folder bursting with papers in her arms. She marched straight toward him like she owned the land, her glasses sliding down her sweaty nose. "You're Tony, right? The genius who ordered the Mirante demolished? Congratulations, you just tore down a state-protected landmark. Here's the record from 1987, stamped and sealed. Want to take a look before I bring this to the judge?" Tony stood there, Vanessa's fake document crumpled in his hand, feeling the heat rise up his neck. "I didn't know, all right. She paid me and said it was all clean." Clara laughed, a dry, sharp laugh that sliced through the air. "Clean? Vanessa lit the match and you brought the gasoline. That lookout was worth more than your last 10 years of wages. And now, all that's left is rubble and a subpoena. And with your name on it." She opened the folder and pulled out a yellowed map, pointing to the red circle around the Mirante. "Look here, Foreman. This is history. And now you've become its villain. The trial day was a circus, the kind that would make even a clown rethink his career. The courtroom was stuffy, the ceiling fan creaking like it was just as exhausted as everyone inside. Vanessa strutted in, wearing a hot pink suit that practically screamed, "I'm innocent," blinding half the room. The fabric sparkled under the fluorescent lights, and she flipped her blonde hair with a rehearsed smile, like she thought she could charm the judge with shampoo commercial confidence. Tony, sitting in the back with a wrinkled shirt and calloused, hands crossed in front of him, just rolled his eyes. "Unbelievable," he muttered, as the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Vanessa's lawyer, a short man in a grey suit and a loose tie, stepped up to the podium with the confidence of someone who's already lost but won't admit it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, clearing his throat like he was about to cough up a brilliant argument. "The Mirante was a public hazard, a crumbling old structure, a danger to anyone nearby." He pointed dramatically into the air, as if the ghost of the lookout was there to confirm his claims. Walter, the prosecutor, didn't even bother standing up. He stayed seated, drumming his fingers on the table, letting a heavy silence fill the room before piling evidence in front of the jury. Photos of the intact lookout, structural reports, the state preservation stamp. Each document hit the table like a nail sealing the coffin of Vanessa's defense. And then came the coup de grace. Tony almost smiled as Walter played his ace, an audio recording from a condo board meeting weeks before the incident. The technician hit play, and Vanessa's voice filled the room, arrogant and crystal clear. "No judge is going to stop me. Just tear it down already, I'll take care of the rest." The silence that followed was deafening. The jury sat stunned, some wide-eyed, others whispering to each other. A middle-aged juror with glasses hanging from her neck even let her jaw drop, like she'd just witnessed a plot twist in a thriller movie. Vanessa, still dressed in blinding pink, lost her smile for the first time. Her face turned pale while her lawyer sank deeper into his seat, defeated. The verdict hit like thunder, swift and merciless, silencing the courtroom chatter in seconds. The judge, a man with thick eyebrows and a gravelly voice, read the sentence, with the calm of someone who'd seen 1,000 Vanessas come and go. "Vanessa Almeida and the condominium are hereby ordered to pay $800,000 in damages to the state and to fully fund the complete reconstruction of the Mirante, brick by brick, until it is restored to its original condition." He paused, adjusted his glasses, and delivered the final blow. Furthermore, the defendant is permanently prohibited from interfering with any protected property and is banned from holding leadership positions anywhere in the state. End of the line. The gavel slammed with a bang that echoed through the room, and the air seemed lighter, at least for those not on the losing side. Vanessa, still clinging to her hot pink suit that now looked more like a designer prison uniform, froze for a good 3 seconds. Her once proud expression crumbled into a mix of shock and rage. Suddenly she stood up, stumbling in her heels, and bolted toward the exit like the courtroom might swallow her whole. The reporters were already at the door, cameras flashing and microphones outstretched, but she shoved her way through, her blonde hair flying like a ripped curtain. Behind her, her lawyer, the same short man with the loose tie, chased after her awkwardly, dropping papers from his bursting folder as he ran. "We'll appeal. This isn't over," he shouted, his voice shrill like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. The reconstruction of the Mirante became an event no one expected, a rare moment when the whole town seemed to remember they breathed the same air. The site once just dust and debris, came alive with the sound of hammers, the scent of fresh wood and the chatter of voices that wouldn't quiet down. People who hadn't spoken to Tony's grandfather in years suddenly showed up, as if the Mirante had turned into a magnet. There was George Miller, the grumpy mechanic from the corner, carrying planks on his shoulders with surprising strength. Mrs. Lucy Harper, who never left the house without her floral apron, bringing a thermos of hot coffee and a tray of freshly fried donuts. Even Timmy, the kid from the pharmacy who was always glued to his phone, put it down to help carry cement. It was organized chaos, with laughter in the air and sunlight warming the sweaty backs of everyone there. The overlook rose day by day, stronger than before. The new foundations, reinforced with steel, seemed to declare that no one would tear it down again. On the day of the grand reopening, a crowd gathered, the breeze gently blowing as they cut the red ribbon. At the center, a bronze plaque gleamed in the sunlight, Grayson Overlook, a symbol of justice and unity. Tony ran his fingers over the engraved words, feeling the weight they carried. His grandfather, who had barely left the porch in recent years, stood at the front, hat in hand, eyes misty as people patted him on the back. People he didn't even know still remembered his name. And there was more. A week later, a letter arrived with the official state seal, handwritten by the governor himself. "Walter, your tireless work brought justice and restored a piece of our history," it read in elegant script. Walter read it aloud to the team, his smile subtle but full of pride. Vanessa. She vanished like smoke after a poorly doused fire. Rumors spread through town like wildfire. Some said she sold her house in Pineview Heights for next to nothing, packed her bags into a silver SUV, and drove off to some faraway state, maybe Texas, maybe Florida, anywhere she could hide from the Overlook disaster. But the realtor who closed the deal swears she didn't even look back, just left behind a trail of glitter from her hot pink suit and a stack of unpaid bills. Pineview Heights was never the same after that, but for the first time, that was a good thing. The air felt lighter, sidewalk conversations flowed more freely, and the neighborhood had finally lost that scent of arrogance Vanessa wore like an expensive perfume.